In using the production wizard, the first thing to be done would be the setup. Setup is typically the same whether no matter what method of scheduling you're going to be using. The initial setup would be for the lines, setting up the lines and just basically determining, and a lot of times the lines can be defined as the mixers that are being used, and you could also set it up such that certain mixers will share the schedule, meaning that batches that are going to that specific line are split between 2 mixers or 3 mixers, however many you want. And then you would set up the smallest possible dough size, the largest possible dough size, and what increments of dough sizes you would want. So in this example here, the smallest is half a dough size to a full dough size, and then the system would calculate the optimal dough size based on the production in increments of 1/10. So it'll be 0.5, 0.6, 7, 8, 9 in one full dough. So it would calculate in that range to determine the best possible dough sizes based on the production, and we'll get to that a little bit later in more detail. Variety maintenance is the most important setup, and this is where for every single product and or dough that you're producing, that you would basically be setting up specifications that the system will use to determine the optimal schedule and all. Previously we set up the most common smallest and the smallest and the largest dough size based on the mixer or the line. Here you would define for this specific product what dough sizes that you would want, and they could not exceed or be less than the settings that are for that specific line. So you would set up your most common, smallest, largest, your scale weight, the net batch weight. Now the net batch weight can be defaulted to the formula size that is within Prims. If you're not using Prims, you do have the capability of inputting it individually. And the last field that's critical or required, the green ones, not all of them, but most of them are required fields, is how long it would take to perform that batch. In this case, how long would it be to mix that particular batch? A couple other fields that you might want to fill out are items per package, packages per box, the finished goods net weight, and the other critical one would be a loss percentage number if you wanted to calculate any loss percentages. Your timings here are also important. If you want to track how long a schedule is going to take for you, you could set up these parameters change based on the type of setting that you have. The production wizard can be configured in many different ways. Here is the mix time, ferment time, and then the important is the changeover time. If it's an allergen and you have an allergen changeover, you would put that here, and I'll show that in a little while. You could also default what oven the specific product will be used in, so that the scheduler can also schedule for your oven also and provide a schedule for that. Dough types are used also in certain scheduling scenarios, such that you could group different products together to see how that scheduling is going for them. The other types of setup are basic stuff. If you're doing shifts, you could set up specific scheduling rules, set up the ovens themselves, different types of equipment that are used within the lines, so that you could schedule out the equipment that's going to be used on the lines if you're using some type of whip type scheduling. Once you have everything set up, then you would go ahead and do your scheduling. In the Production Wizard, there are many different what I call front ends to how you could do your scheduling. We're going to cover one of them here, and it's one of your more typical methods for bread making or buns and that type of scheduling. It's not the simplest, but it's by far not the more complicated. It's a fairly straightforward scheduling method. In this case here, you're going to basically bring in your, and when I say front end, it's just a way of getting the data into the Production Wizard, and how the Production Wizard then manipulates that data to get to your schedule. There are, like I said, many ways and many different variations of each way that can be set up and configured. The sales history that you have is either imported or entered into the system. In this case, it's just very basic history that's needed. It's the formula code, a date, and how much. Those are the three main fields that is all needed. Is just a product code, a date, and a quantity. Because what will happen there, then the system will create a schedule based off of that information in a forecast type. This particular setting here is just going back a couple different weeks from the date that I'm actually looking at. And you could then set this up to any methodology that you want. If you wanted to go back, a year, several months and all, you could set all that up. And in our case here, it's defaulting to several weeks prior to use as a forecasting model for this. You could set up a sequence here, which you set up templates inside the system, which would then, based on that template, would sequence what it projects to make into the sequence that is in the template that you have. You can also restrict the products that are being scheduled to what is in the template by checking this off here, only scheduled template items. You can also set the system up to also schedule pre-scale totally separate than mixing. You don't have to do that. You could just do one schedule for both pre-scale and mixing, and the system would separate out your pre-scales to your pre-scale stations and your mixers to your mixer stations automatically. But in some cases, people do pre-scaling days prior to actually mixing, so they would actually need to separate out two schedules. This configuration right now is showing that, but we're just going to look at pre-scale for our purposes here. You could set up multiple shifts if you want, shift 1, shift 2, as many as you do need. You could set up standing orders and have them also created. If you have frozen in there, you could also filter that out, because frozen typically is not scheduled based on a forecasting model. It's typically done more on a inventory based one or based on orders. And then we would just hit OK, and then the system would go and create a schedule. Once it's done, it'll come up and it looks exactly like this here. For every single line, it'll list all of the products that I'm going to run on that line based on my forecast model, and show here all the lines that you have. In doing that, it says how many I need. If I calculated my loss percentage, how much I would need to make based on that loss percentage. Then based on those numbers, it calculates how many doughs. Here it's going to be 21 doughs, size 1. And you get two different types of doughs that it can calculate. In certain cases here I'm doing 6 doughs size 1 and another one at 0.6. And again, this is all configured by that setup that we did previously. At this point, the production manager or whoever is working your schedule can move these around, resequence them. They could add, delete, basically do anything that you need to that you would want prior to doing that. Now this could typically be done for multiple days out at this point. You could, here we did for 1 day. We can now go back and do another day, and as many as we want to project out, we can go and do. Now, when we're ready to actually send this schedule down to the prims or the production floor, we could print a requirements report, and this will basically just show us all of the raw material that is needed to produce this specific schedule. It'll go out and look at the current production and modify this based on that. Everything that you see in red here is basically a problem, meaning that I'm short that. I don't have enough here in my plan to produce this, so you could transfer it from another warehouse or rush out and purchase it, whatever is necessary that's needed. Then once that's done, we would just basically set up our schedule. And what this does is it takes this specific schedule that we have and breaks it out into each individual line. As we could see here, it shows me each individual dough. It breaks it out into the individual doughs. So here I'm making 16 doughs of small bread here. And it shows us how long it's going to take for each individual batch. And if I start at a certain time in the morning, in this case 6, when would I finish? And this is saying that I'll finish on the same day at 1927 would be, and you could print many different reports. It shows the variety breaks that are in there. We didn't set this up on this particular demonstration, but you could put in relief breaks, which would be coffee breaks or lunch breaks. That's set up under the lines where you would set that all up, and you could then see where those fit into the schedule and increase the time and everything. In situations where you have allergens, it shows those in red here, where this is an allergen changeover. At this point also, the production manager or whoever is doing the scheduling can manipulate this prior to finally sending this down. They could move things around, they could add, delete, and then when everything is good, you would just basically send it to prims, and this specific schedule will be then distributed out to all of the work plans that are associated with it, which would typically be, in this case, scaling stations. In other ones, it could be mixing stations, or it could be both scaling and mixing stations. This basically would complete the process for that there. There's quite a few different reports that can be produced. There's a recap sheet, which is a fairly straightforward report that just recaps that particular schedule, how long it's going to take, starting and ending, your total poundage, and things of that nature. And then another one that's more common to be used would be a dough sheet, and there's many different variations of this particular report that can be produced. This is a more common one, but these columns here are user definable. You could change these column headings and make them whatever is more applicable to what you're looking at, but this shows you, every single dough and all the timing associated with it. And you could use this for determining if you are doing pre-scale the same day, when times pre-scale needs to be done so that it's ready for the mixer, etc., etc. And that's pretty much everything on that side. But just to go a little bit further, because if you are doing oven scheduling and such, if we did set that up, we go back in time a little bit. Maybe we could grab one. It would, based on your mixing schedule, you could then set up an oven schedule, and you could see as whatever oven you have. And again, this can be manipulated at this point by somebody by changing the sequence, adding, deleting into this particular schedule. And then there's several reports that are associated with this. You have production line reports, a line efficiency, an oven report, and an oven efficiency report, and a production oven line report. All these are it's more typical to the actual orders. There's one thing that I did miss showing you originally is when you come into here on your original schedule. These are the doughs that are being scheduled, and here you could come in. If I go into this is split, so when you come into here, you'll see the actual products that are being made for that one dough. And in many times, the number of products that are coming out could be a lot. Here we have 6 or 7 products that are being produced for this out of this one dough, and this is what's taken into account on your makeup reports and on your oven report. It'll actually show you the actual products and not the doughs, of course, on those specific schedules and reports and the like. So that's pretty much everything on that type of methodology. One methodology that could be done would be one for where you're scheduling out products that are either frozen or made out of inventory, or on a more extreme side would be products that are made in more over several days, where you'll create a sub product on one day, put it in the cooler or freezer, and let it cool down or freeze, and then the next day take it back out and actually finish it. Or sometimes you may make some ingredients prior to that, and those are a little bit more complicated. Now, in this methodology that we're going to go through, this shows that extreme end of creating a schedule for products that are made over several days. But this methodology could be also used for any type of products that you're going to be just doing, either calculating it from inventory or from sales orders. In this case, the sales orders are going to be either imported into the system, or they're going to be manually entered. And those orders are what's going to be used to determine your schedule. This here is a screen that shows you all the products that you make, and for every single day it shows you how many of those you need to produce or have for satisfying your orders. Of course, at that point in time, in today's date, you would have pre-planned, but in this case, the reds are what you want to look for as the problems. So here basically we're showing that we're going to be 81 cases short on this product for a delivery. In this screen here, It has a lot of information going on. It shows you prior history of it. 1 year ago, how many did I sell? How many I sold the month after 1 year ago, and 2 months. In this case, we're showing 3 months, so you could set this system up here to show just 2 months instead of three, and then this is the total of those 3 months. And then it shows you how many I have on inventory, and then it calculates across how many I have in inventory, and then the work order column is how many I'm going to produce. That's your schedule. This work order column is your scheduled column, which are all the purples. So everything purple you see is the numbers that you're actually going to be producing. And then the balance, the OH on hand column is the balance. So it'll just add up across and show you, in this case, this one product I'm falling short on. So what happens here is the production manager will look at this schedule and then enter in your work orders based on your needs and what they feel. There's also a par level that you can set, which is this column here, which means how many typically you want to maintain on your inventory level, so that you could then use that as a gauge on how much to schedule and make. And then of course this would then go through for all the products that you have. This goes out 21 days on a single view, and of course you could make that as far out as you typically want by using these buttons down here. You could then increment out by either this will move out by 1 day, and this will move out by another 21 days. So that you could use this type of scheduling to schedule out for the future, whether it's several months or just several weeks, whatever works best for you. So this is the way you would basically plan your schedule out for moving forward and each day out. And you're not looking at 1 day here, you're looking at the large picture. This is just the starting point in which you're going to use. There's a lot of different things that could be done on this here, and the system automatically calculates behind the scenes in the scenario that we're looking at, that if I got to make these 1400 on 8/15, that means on these prior days there's going to be other production being made for that. You can't see it on this particular screen, but we're going to look at that in another minute here. So then once you have that, you would then set up your daily ones. So you would go through and create your work orders, and at that point you would then look at your schedule on a day-to-day basis, and from there it'll show you everything that needs to be done on this specific day. And in this case, the stuff that's being baked out is not being shipped that day. It's just stuff that's going to be made for prior days. What's done on your lines is of course going to be either stuff that's being shipped that day or other things that are being prepped that would be going back into the freezer or cooler and everything. As you click on each product on the right side here, it'll show you any sub-formulas or sub-processes that are required to produce that particular product. So, for this particular product, I would need this mix to be done that day, so that this would schedule this mix that day so that it'll satisfy that line. And then from here you would then calculate what you have to, and you could send it all down to Prims. As you can see, again, this is a little bit more complicated and detailed than the other methodology. Another sub screen for this here that's somewhat important, that would be more typical for a customer that's just using this for frozen and not scheduling products that are made over multiple days, that you don't really need to have this kind of a view because it's not really applicable. There's no reason to be, baking and all this, and, it's a much simpler process. So in those cases, you would use a screen more typically like this that just shows you, everything that I'm going to be producing that day, and all in a much simpler view. And from here you could do the same thing that you have on that screen, which is your production requirement reports again, and you could create pick lists from both of these screens that I just going through right now. You could create a pick list for these that would show you exactly what products need to be picked. This question here is a very important one. Do you want to take into what's in production already? And typically you're going to say yes to that because you want the system to calculate exactly what you need out on the floor for that schedule. So in this case, it's showing us that this strawberry product here, I don't need to pick it because I have, even though I'm making production today, I still have enough out on the production floor to satisfy today's current production plus this schedule. But this one here, I'm not. I do have to pick it. So the system will take that into account, and us answering that question by yeses would let us see that kind of calculations going on. This is another important question from the pick list. Do I want to create transfers? If you're using PRIMS to actually transfer the inventory from warehouse to production floor, you'd say yes here. Would then go to our tablet application where the warehouse people would then get a transfer to whatever areas they had to. In this case, it would be to the lines, to the baking area, to the mixing area, and all that. It would create those transfers all automatically, and they would be able to pick and move those over at that point in time. You also have a weekly view, which is kind of interesting and important, where it'll show you for every single day all the products that you're making, so that this way you can move things around if you need to. All these screens we're looking at can be printed as well as exported to Excel, so that this way you could look at your schedules out months in advance in an Excel spreadsheet if you wanted to. This going back just to this type of view and all, when you're doing this type of processing, we also have other screens here which are a little bit more detailed, where you could take this weekly view and actually manipulate this around and optimize your lines which you're producing, because when you're looking at it in this kind of a view on a day-to-day basis, you can't necessarily optimize actually what you've produced, and this screen does allow you to do that. And this gets a little bit complicated and all in how it processes, but it handles it. And this also will show you all the equipment that you need to use for that line, and if you're falling short with that equipment, and takes all that into account. A couple other things that come out of this here. If you're basically working out of multiple warehouses, this will show you your different warehouses that you have, and show you if you have to transfer product from one warehouse to another warehouse to satisfy orders. So what this is showing us here is our total orders by day that are shipping that day, and then out of which warehouse they're shipping. The reds will indicate that that warehouse is short product. Now it could be short product because it doesn't exist, or it could be short because it exists in another warehouse. If it exists in another warehouse, this is the tool you would use to basically allow you to move product from one warehouse to another so you can satisfy your orders. The really important one that comes out of this one is your raw material requirements. And this screen here looks at, based on the work orders that we set up in our schedule, these are all the products, the ingredients that will be needed to satisfy the schedule. And by day it's showing you the needs, and then it's showing you any purchase orders that are coming in, whether they're going to satisfy it. And again, the red is what you're looking for, and that's showing you that on this particular day I'm going to fall short of sour cream, so I need to make sure I put in a purchase order prior to Thursday to satisfy my production on Thursday for sour cream. And then this again also goes out to 21 days, and you could look as far out into the future as you want, or basically as far out as your schedule was done. And that pretty much covers all of your scheduling aspects of PRIMS, the Production Wizard with this methodology. In the Production Wizard, you also have the capability to use it for your accounts receivable. We're not going to go through it into really a lot of detail here, just quickly touch on it. You could do your full sales order entry here, where you would just select your customer, fill out your sales order. It's pretty comprehensive with delivery dates, different types of allowances, discounts, and, et cetera, et cetera. It's fairly straightforward, not on the high end, but definitely not on the low end either. And then you would be able to do invoicing, enter in payments, your cash receipts journal, full aging reports, deduction reports. You could print statements out. You could do brokers. You could do multi-companies. It also handles all of your sales, every sales report that you could think for comparisons, whether it's price comparisons over months, over years, sales reports over months, years, etc. There's quite a lot of tools here for your accounts receivable that's not even in your standard accounting packages and all. And that pretty much sums everything up, and that's it.